At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? My name's Carol. Let's begin. The thunderstorm didn't ask permission. Morgan Koufax crouched in the mud, rain hammering her shoulders, and watched her friend's shelter fold like wet cardboard. Kisk shrieked, a high, warbling keen that cut through the downpour as the pine bough framework collapsed. Zelia stood 3 meters away, all 8 feet of her locked in place, her flower head petals sealed tight as a fist. Move! Morgan lunged forward, grabbing Kisk's thin arm and hauling her clear as the last support gave way. Zelia, we need... The synthesized voice cut through the storm, flat and toneless. Simulation failed. Cause: shelter integrity compromised. Framework failure due to rapid soil liquefaction. The rain stopped mid-drop. The thunder cut out. The forest froze. Pixels holding their positions like actors caught between scenes. Kisk's quills lay flat against her blue-gray skin, slick with simulated water that was already evaporating into nothing. Her dark, deep-set eyes, normally hooded against high-altitude glare, were wide open, their nictitating membranes clicking rapidly. 5 times, she whispered. We've failed 5 times. Zelia's petals unfurled slowly, revealing the delicate stamens that served as her primary sensory organs. She smelled of struck flint, sharp and metallic. Her voice emerged as a low creak, each syllable formed with visible effort. The pressure differential suggested precipitation. I calculated the statistical likelihood of localized flooding based on the topographic data. I accounted for soil saturation rates, canopy density affecting runoff velocity, and... You thought too much. Morgan pushed her wet hair from her face, even though the water was already gone. The air got heavy, the bugs went quiet. You could have just looked up and seen it coming. The world dissolved around them in a wash of pale blue light. The mess hall on Venture Zenith smelled of chilled, recycled air and the faint chemical tang of the protein dispensers. Morgan, Kisk, and Zelia emerged from the simulation pods into the sterile brightness, blinking against the harsh white light. Their meal, gray cubes of reconstituted kelp, dense and chewy, sat untouched on their trays. Instructor Jor waited at their usual table. His body was a wide, low-slung torso, supported by 4 powerful limbs, 2 of which terminated in fine, multi-jointed manipulators. His chalky white skin was coated in a fine, dust-like powder that shifted into faint, branching patterns when he moved, like frost spreading on a cold pane. He didn't speak until they sat. The air pressure dropped 12 millibars in 30 minutes. His voice bubbled up from 3 separate spiracles, creating a strange harmony beneath the universal translator's interpretation. What did that signify? Silence. The insects fell silent 13 minutes before the first raindrops. Why? Zelia's flower head tilted downward. Kisk stabbed at her protein brick with more force than necessary, her beak clicking in agitation. Jor's attention shifted. In the previous run, the simulation registered a spike in your biomonitors during the campfire sequence, Zelia. Why? The Signian's petals folded inward slightly. When she spoke, her words came slowly, as if each one required careful extraction. Fire on my world is controlled. Plasma torches, thermal regulators, contained heat sources with predictable parameters. The simulation's campfire. It moved without pattern. The flames would leap and shrink, the heat would spike and fall. I could not predict its behavior. So you froze? I analyzed.
You froze, Jor repeated, not unkindly. The fine powder on his skin momentarily swirled into a tight spiral. Analysis without action is observation. Observation without response is failure. Kisk's quills rose along her spine.
How are we supposed to predict a flash flood? The parameters were flawed. We followed procedure. We cross-referenced the meteorological data.
You followed procedure into a grave. Jor gurgled, his prosthetic tapping once on the table. Again. These by-the-book failures are precisely why my proposals for a new training initiative are being stonewalled. You died. Wet, cold, confused, dead. The bluntness landed like a bat upside the head. Morgan's fist hit the table hard enough to make the protein bricks jump. The sound echoed in the quiet of the mess hall. A dozen heads, some with heads, some with sensor arrays, some with things that defied easy description, turned to stare.
The simulation is the problem.
Her voice came out rough, a scratch in her throat.
It's pixels and data points. It doesn't smell right. It doesn't feel right. You can't learn to swim from a textbook, and you can't learn Earth from a data stream.
Jor's spiracles went silent for 3 full seconds. When he hummed again, it was a low, considering chord. Explain.
The simulation gives you information. Earth gives you experience. There's a difference.
Morgan leaned forward, her calloused hands flat on the table.
On Earth, you don't need to calculate air pressure. You feel the weight of the air change. You don't analyze insect behavior patterns with tech. You notice when the force goes quiet, and you know something's wrong. The simulation can't teach that. It can only show you dying while you try to figure it out.
The simulation, Jor measured his words, has been the Pathfinder Corps' primary training tool for complex biosphere integration for 50 ship years. It has processed trillions of environmental variables. It has never passed a single recruit on the Earth scenario. The table went silent. Even Kisk's quills settled. Morgan met Jor's gaze, or what passed for a gaze in a species without distinct eyes.
50 years. Trillions of variables, not one graduate. Maybe the problem isn't the recruits.
The briefing room was as sterile as every other space on Venture's Zenith. White walls, blue trim, chairs designed for a variety of anatomies. Jor stood at the front, his chrome prosthetic clicking softly as he manipulated the holographic display. The Earth simulation, he gurgled, pulling up a 3-dimensional model of a temperate forest, remains our ultimate crucible. For 50 ship years, no recruit has conquered it. The chaotic dynamic classification means the system contains too many variables in constant flux for standard predictive modeling. It requires what we call intuitive adaptation. He let the words hang there, watching his class. Does anyone have a new strategy? Morgan raised her hand. 23 pairs of eyes and eye adjacents swiveled toward her. The room's air scrubbers hummed, a low thrum in the sudden quiet. Then let's change the test. Her voice shook, but she kept it level. Authorize a field exam. Let us take the final on Earth. For real. A stylus clattered on the deck, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. Kisk's beak dropped open. Zelia emitted a sudden burst of honeysuckle, the scent she produced when observing something unexpectedly beautiful, or startlingly bold. A rapid series of dissonant chords hummed from Jor's spiracles before settling on a steady low tone. That's a radical proposal, Recruit Koufax. It's the only one that makes sense, sir. The Pathfinder regulations for field examination require extensive environmental surveys, hazard analysis, emergency extraction procedures, medical standby teams. My family has a cabin in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Isolated, safe, the perfect testing ground. Morgan's fingers drummed once against her thigh, then stilled. I've been going there since I could walk. I know every trail, every stream, every animal that might show up. If you want us to pass the Earth Crucible, let me show my team the real thing. The room erupted in a dozen languages and communication methods. Jor let it happen for exactly 10 seconds before a sharp pulse of deep red from his skin silenced them. My office. 1 hour. Dismissed. Jor's office defied the sterile uniformity of the rest of Venture Zenith. Paper star charts yellowed at the edges, their corners pinned with what looked like actual thumbtacks. Alien artifacts, a Signian navigation stone, its surface whirled like petrified wood, a Cath singing implement, a dozen others Morgan couldn't identify, cluttered every surface. The smell was strange and organic, like minerals and seawater. Jor settled into his chair, a specifically designed frame that accommodated his wide body and multiple limbs. He rested his chrome prosthetic on the desk, drumming its fingers in a slow, steady rhythm against the metal. Sit. Morgan sat. Your proposal violates a dozen different Pathfinder safety regulations and completely abandons the standardized examination framework we've used for half a century. The powder on his skin showed a neutral, uniform texture. However, it's exactly the kind of thinking my experimental curriculum pilot program was designed to test. Morgan blinked. Sir? The board approved my pilot program on a provisional basis 3 months ago. They want to see if unconventional training methods produce better field operatives. My charter grants me provisional authority to run non-standard evaluations with expedited approval, provided I assume full responsibility. A patch of powder on his torso briefly swirled into a complex starburst. You've just handed me the perfect test case. But understand this. If I authorize this field exam, it's official. You pass, or all 3 of you wash out of the Pathfinder Corps. No retakes, no second chances. We won't get a second chance in the simulation either. We've tried 5 times. True. Jor clicked something on his prosthetic, a small panel that opened with a soft hiss. He stared into it for a long moment. I lost my first team on a world the data called safe. A canyon that hadn't seen water in 100 years according to every survey. We were halfway through when an atmospheric pressure change, a rare event not accounted for in the model, triggered a flash flood. His spiracles bubbled softly. They trusted the datapad over the sound of distant water. By the time they realized the data was incomplete, it was too late. The rhythm of his prosthetic's drumming changed. Slower now. Heavier. I pulled 3 bodies from the mud. I lost my leg in the process. He looked up at her. So yes, Recruit Koufax, I understand the difference between reading the map and feeling the mud. I understand it better than anyone on this station. Morgan waited, her hands still in her lap. I'll authorize your field exam under my pilot program. But there are conditions. A low, resonant tone, the sound of a tomb door ceiling, issued from his spiracles. Any serious injury terminates the test. Any environmental contamination, any failure to complete the objectives, you all wash out. My program is terminated, and the resulting formal censure will effectively end my career. Do you understand the stakes? Yes, sir. Then tell me about this cabin. Morgan described it. The elevation, the isolation, the wildlife they might encounter. She talked about the solar panels her father had installed, the hand pump for the well, the wood stove that heated the place in the winter. She described the smell of pine sap in summer, the way rain sounded on the metal roof, the silence that wrapped around you at night when the generator was off. Jor listened without interruption. When she finished, A complex pattern of interlocking hexagons rippled through the powder on his skin. I'll submit the authorization request tonight. If the board approves it, we leave in 1 week.
He leaned forward.
Pack light. Pack smart. And recruit Kufax.
Sir?
Don't prove them right.
The Pathfinder shuttle touched down in a clearing 1 mile from the cabin, its landing gear settling into grass that bent but didn't break. The ramp descended with a pneumatic hiss. Earth hit Kisk and Zelia like a blanket of bricks. The air was thick, humid, heavy with moisture and organic complexity. It smelled of pine needles and damp earth, of growing things and decomposing things, of a million chemical signals the universal translator couldn't begin to interpret. The sound was a weight on the senses. Birds calling, insects buzzing, wind rushing. That made their translator implants whine with overload. Kisk took 3 steps down the ramp and stumbled, her hollow bones protesting against the gravity that was 20% stronger than her homeworld. Her quills rose and fell in waves, hissing softly as she tried to process the visual data. The canopy above was a riot of movements, every leaf fluttering, every branch swaying, creating a flurry of shifting shadows that made her inner ear scream in protest. Zelia's flower head petals curled inward until they formed a tight, protective bud. The chemical signals from a billion plants hit her sensory stamens like screaming territorial markers. Distress pheromones, reproductive signals, defensive compounds. Her woody limbs locked up, refusing to move until she could categorize and analyze the overwhelming input. Morgan stepped off the ramp, closed her eyes, and smiled. "Smell that?" She breathed deep, her chest expanding. "That's rain on the wind. We'll have a storm by tomorrow night." Jor moved past them all on his 4 limbs, his prosthetic leaving a distinct impression in the soft earth. He circled the clearing once, the powder on his skin shifting through various patterns as he analyzed their surroundings. When he completed his circuit, it settled into a neutral, uniform texture.
1 mile to the cabin. You have 2 hours.
Kisk's beak clicked 3 times in rapid succession. 2 hours? That's
generous, given the terrain.
Jor gestured toward the tree line.
Move out.
Kisk, who could glide for hours in her homeworld's floating forests, struggled with the basic mechanics of walking on uneven ground. Her feet caught on roots she didn't see, on rocks hidden beneath leaves. The heavy gravity pulled at her with every step, turning what should have been a simple walk into an exhausting slog. She kept her eyes fixed downward, fighting the dizziness that came from watching the canopy move above her. Zelia moved in centimeter increments, each step requiring a full sensory analysis before she committed her weight. The forest floor was chaos, decomposing leaves releasing chemical signals of decay, insects marking territories with pheromones, fungi communicating through underground networks. Her analytical mind tried to categorize it all, to find patterns in the noise, and only found more noise beneath. Morgan became their anchor. She stopped every 100 meters, waiting for the others to catch up. She pointed out deer tracks pressed into the mud, teaching them to distinguish hoofprints from the scattered marks of smaller animals. She identified bird calls, the harsh caw of a jay, the rapid-fire drumming of a woodpecker, and showed them how to watch their footing by observing where she placed her feet. "See the moss on that tree?" She pointed to a Douglas fir trunk. "North side is thicker. Helps to orient yourself if you ever get turned around." Kisk's quills settled slightly. She'd been memorizing every turn, every landmark, building a mental map the way her people navigated the vertical forests of home. But Morgan's method was different, less about memorization and more about reading the environment as it comes. "On my world," Zelia creaked, "the forests are silent, orderly. Each tree grows in its designated zone, spaced for optimal photosynthesis. The ground is covered in nitrogen-fixing moss that releases a single clear chemical signal. It's... She paused, her petals opening slightly. It's nothing like this. Your world sounds peaceful. Yours sounds alive. Morgan grinned. It is. That's the point. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a history text. Rough, hewn logs, a metal roof green with lichen, windows with actual glass panes, a covered porch wrapped around the front. The wood weathered silver gray by sun and rain. Kisk chirped softly. It's small. It's perfect. Morgan bounded up the porch steps and pulled a key from beneath a loose board. The door swung open with a creak that spoke of honest hinges and unlubricated metal. The cabin's interior smelled of cedar and old wood smoke, of dust and dried pine needles. Morgan moved through it, throwing open shutters to clear the musty air, working the iron hand pump until clean water flowed, pulling canvas covers off furniture with single, snapping motions. Kisk discovered the loft, climbing the ladder, testing each rung before putting her full weight on it. She pressed her face against the small window, her quills lying flat as she took in the view of the forest canopy. A squirrel chittered in the rafters directly above her head, and she jumped back so fast she nearly fell off the ladder. Zelia traced the grain of the wooden floor with one woody digit, feeling the growth rings beneath the worn surface. These trees were alive? You live in the bodies of dead organisms? Technically, Morgan called from the kitchen. But yeah, wood construction is standard for this kind of building. The trees these came from were probably harvested 80 years ago. 80 years. Zelia's flower head rotated slowly, taking in the whole structure. On my worlds, we grow our dwellings from living trees. They continue to photosynthesize, to grow, to be part of the forest. That sounds beautiful. It is. But this... She ran her hand along a log wall, feeling the joints where the wood interlocked. This is honest, solid. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Morgan smiled and showed them the solar panel array on the roof, the battery system that ran the minimal electrical needs. She demonstrated the wood stove, pointing out the damper and the ash drawer, explaining how to build a fire that would burn all night without consuming all their fuel. Jor completed his perimeter inspection and settled on the porch, his body positioned so he could observe both the forest and the cabin's interior. The powder on his skin was uniform, but Morgan heard a change in the low hum from his spiracles. The sun was touching the treetops when he spoke. Your first official task? Survive the night. Emergency tech only. He reached over with his prosthetic and deactivated each of their Pathfinder beacons with a series of soft clicks. The devices went dark on their belts. Kisk's quills rose. Sir, that's... Regulation for field survival training. Jor clicked the panel on his prosthetic open and pulled out a simple flint scraper. He tossed it to Morgan, who caught it one-handed. Practical tools only. Fire, shelter, water. Show me you can. Morgan turned the scraper over in her hands, testing its weight. You had this the whole time. I always have practical tools, Jor gurgled. Kisk had never built a fire from scratch. Her homeworld met its energy needs through biological luminescence and thermal absorption from their sun. The concept of combustion for warmth was theoretical. She struck the flint 12 times before Morgan gently took it from her hands. Forget force. It's all about the angle. She demonstrated, scraping the steel down the flint's edge in a smooth, controlled motion. Sparks showered onto the pile of pine needles and dry grass she'd prepared. See? Like that. Zelia kept her distance,
all 8 feet of her pressed against the far wall of the cabin. She watched the sparks with the intensity of someone observing a venomous creature. When the first small flame caught and began to spread through the tinder, her flower had sealed completely. The scent of struck flint filled the cabin. Morgan looked up from the growing fire. Zelia? It's unpredictable. The words came muffled through her closed petals. I cannot model its behavior. The heat distribution is chaotic. The oxygen consumption rate varies with fuel density and arrangement. There are too many variables. You're right. There are. Morgan fed small sticks into the flames, building the fire with careful deliberation. But you don't need to model it. You just need to respect it. Fire's not your enemy. It's a tool. And like any tool, it's only dangerous if you don't understand it. I don't understand it. Then let me show you. Morgan spent the next hour teaching them firecraft. She showed them how to find dry tinder, the papery bark of birch trees, the dead needles beneath pine boughs, the fluffy seed heads of last year's cattails. She demonstrated how to build a fire for warmth versus a fire for cooking, how to read the color of the flames, how to bank it for the night so it would smolder until morning. Zelia's petals opened slowly, millimeter by millimeter, her analytical focus sharpening. The key is containment, Morgan explained, building a careful ring of rocks around their campfire outside. You control the fuel, you control the fire. Simple as that. Nothing about fire is simple, Zelia creaked. But she moved closer, close enough to feel the heat on her woody limbs. Her flower head was fully open now, stamens extended, sampling the air. The sharp pine scent, her analytical mode, mixed with something sweeter, not quite honeysuckle, but close. Kisk achieved success on her 15th attempt, sending a spray of sparks into her tinder pile that caught and held. She chirped, a sharp, triumphant note, her quills vibrating. I did it! Did you see? The flames flared suddenly as a gust of wind hit them, and she jumped back with a startled hiss. Morgan laughed, warm and easy. Yeah, it does that. Wind's picking up. Storm coming, just like I said. The campfire settled into a steady crackle, and Morgan pulled out a bag of marshmallows from the cabin's pantry. She demonstrated the art of roasting them on sharpened sticks, turning them over the coals until the exterior turned golden brown. Kisk took one cautious bite, and her eyes went wide. She devoured 3 more in rapid succession, her beak clicking between mouthfuls. This is amazing! What did you call it? Sugar and gelatin? Nothing fancy. On my world, we sustain ourselves on nutrient rations. They're functional, calculated for total nutrient delivery. Kisk reached for another marshmallow. They taste like sterile packaging compared to this. The fire painted their faces in warm orange light, softening the sharp edges of their alien features. Zelia's flower head glowed from within, her petals translucent in the flickering illumination. Kisk stared into the fire. I worry, she said, her voice small, that my bones are too light for the Pathfinders, that I'll be the one who breaks in the fields. On my world, strength is measured by endurance in flight, by how high you can climb before the air gets thin. I was always the first to land. Her quills drooped. I failed at home. What if I fail here too? Morgan tossed another log onto the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. You walked a mile through terrain you've never experienced, in gravity that's trying to pull you through the ground. You learned to build fire. You're adapting. That's not failure. But no buts. You're here. You're trying. That's what matters. Zelia's voice emerged like the creak of old wood under strain. On my world, the forests grow in silence.
Each tree knows its place. The chemical signals are clear, organized, purposeful. When I arrived here, the noise.
She paused, searching for words.
It felt like screaming. Like a billion voices all talking at once, none of them making sense. I couldn't analyze it. I couldn't categorize it. I could only stand there and feel it wash over me.
And now?
Now,
Zelia's petals rustled softly.
now it feels less like screaming and more like singing. I still don't understand all of it, but I'm beginning to hear the patterns, the rhythms beneath the chaos.
Jor sat outside the firelight, his body a pale shape in the darkness. A soft, steady chord, warm, resonant, hummed from his spiracles. He said nothing. They roasted marshmallows until the bag was empty, and the fire burned low. The night sounds of the forest surrounded them. Crickets chirping, an owl calling in the distance, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Kisk fell asleep curled in a nest of blankets on the loft, her quills lying flat and peaceful. Zelia settled near the wood stove, her woody limbs arranged in an interlocking brace that somehow looked comfortable. Morgan banked the fire and lay down on the couch, her eyes on the window, watching the stars through the swaying branches. They were all asleep when the crash came. The sound shook the cabin's floorboards, the clatter of metal, the splintering of wood, the heavy impact of something large hitting the porch. Morgan was moving before her mind fully processed what she'd heard, muscle memory from 100 camping trips taking over. She grabbed the iron fireplace poker with one hand and the heavy flashlight with the other. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the cabin's interior in harsh white light. Kiss scrambled down from the loft, her quills fully extended, vibrating. Zelia emitted the sharp, metallic scent of struck flint so strongly it made Morgan's eyes water. Outside, something snuffled and grunted. Heavy footfalls crossed the porch, accompanied by the sound of claws scraping on wood. Jor materialized from the shadows, his bulk crossing the room in 2 silent strides. The powder on his skin was dark, almost black, and it shifted in sharp, chaotic bursts that exposed the chalky white beneath. He positioned himself between the door and the recruits. "Stay back," Morgan whispered. She moved toward the door, her steps silent on the wooden floor. "Recruit Kufax," Jor gurgled softly. "Identify the threat." She pressed her ear against the door, listening. The snuffling sound continued, growing fainter as whatever it was moved around the side of the cabin. "Black bear," she whispered. "Young one, probably. They're curious, and our food wasn't secured properly." "Threat assessment?" "Moderate. They only get aggressive when defending cubs. This one just wants to see what we've got worth eating." She turned to face her friends. "Nobody goes outside until dawn. We sit tight and wait it out." They sat tight. The bear investigated the cabin for another 20 minutes, occasionally bumping against the walls or testing the porch railing. When it finally wandered off, they could hear it crashing through the underbrush, moving with the careless noise of something confident in its strength and place in these woods. Kisk's quills remained erect until the forest went quiet again. Dawn came with the clean, sharp light that only exists at elevation. Morgan was already awake, had been since the first gray hint touched the eastern sky. She stood on the porch, poker still in hand, studying the evidence. The food packs on the porch, unsecured. In the exhaustion of arrival, she'd tasked Kisk with stowing them, but the Aaron, still fighting the crushing gravity and sensory overload, had clearly set them down and forgotten. A team failure. Her failure for not double-checking. The packs were shredded. Protein bricks and ration bars scattered across the clearing, some partially eaten, most just torn open and abandoned. And there, pressed deep into the mud near the porch steps, were the tracks. Large, clawed, unmistakable. Jor emerged from the cabin, followed by Zelia and Kisk. He moved to the tracks and knelt, his prosthetic purring as he measured the splay of the claws. He dipped a finger in the mud and brought it close to his spiracles, analyzing the scent. Black bear, juvenile, approximately 80 kilograms. The powder on his skin flickered. My field experience concurs with your assessment, Recruit Koufax. An environmental pressure. The test continues. He straightened, his gaze sweeping across all three of them. New objective. Secure your shelter and your remaining food stores. Prevent future incursions. You have until nightfall.
Sir?
Kisk chirped, her voice sharp with renewed energy.
Recommend we establish a perimeter defense. Pressure plates connected to auditory deterrents, motion sensors linked to...
Emergency tech only remains in effect, Jor gurgled. Use what's available. No advanced systems. Kisk's quills flattened, and her beak snapped shut with a click. Zelia moved to the tree line, her flower head rotating slowly as she analyzed the forest.
We could construct a barrier, a physical fortification using fallen timber. If I calculate the optimal placement, account for approach vectors, and reinforce the weak points with interlocking.
That would take days, Morgan interrupted. She stood with her hands on her hips, surveying the damage. We don't have days. We have until tonight.
Then, what do you suggest?
Zelia's voice was tight, her flower head sealing partially.
The creature demonstrated clear resource-seeking behavior. It will return.
Probably, Morgan agreed. So, we make it not worth returning. She outlined her plan while the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. It was simple, direct, and used nothing they didn't already have. Kisk argued for something more elaborate. Zelia wanted more time to analyze variables. They talked over each other, their voices rising, until Morgan held up one hand. Stop. Both of you, just stop. She waited until they went quiet. You're both thinking like the simulation. Calculate everything, account for every variable, build the perfect defense. But perfect takes time. We don't have, and it uses resources we can't spare. We need good enough, and we need it now. Good enough gets people killed, Kisk shot back. No, hesitation gets people killed. Overthinking gets people killed. Morgan's voice was firm. We're going to hang our food in a tree, rig up a noisemaker, and make ourselves a pain in the ass for anything that tries to raid our camp. That's it. Simple, effective, done by noon. Zelia's flower head remained partially closed, her voice muffled.
But the statistical probability of success
doesn't matter if we're still arguing when the sun goes down. A rapid, unreadable series of chords hummed from Jor's spiracles. When they looked to him for guidance, he fell silent, and the powder on his skin settled into a single, sharp circle on his central mass. Recruit Koufax has operational command for this exercise. Follow her lead. They worked through the morning, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, they worked as a unit. Zelia used her massive strength to haul a rope over a high branch, creating a pulley system to raise their food cache 20 feet off the ground. Her woody limbs moved with an engineer's care, positioning the rope, testing the weight, making adjustments until the setup was secure. She didn't analyze, she didn't hesitate. She just worked. Kisk, with her sharp vision and natural agility, climbed to the cabin's roof and scanned the clearing. She identified the most likely approach paths, game trails, and areas with crushed underbrush, and called down coordinates to Morgan. Then she rigged a perimeter alarm using nothing but tin cans filled with pebbles and fishing line. Simple, crude, effective. When Morgan pointed out one line was strung too high, Kisk adjusted it without complaint. A quick correction with no wasted motion instead of a debate. Morgan foraged, moving through the forest as if reading a familiar book. She found edible roots, wild onions, biscuit root, yampa, and berries that Kisk's sharp eyes had missed. She gathered cattail shoots from the marshy area near the stream and identified which mushrooms were safe. Their lost rations wouldn't matter now. They moved with a new rhythm, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with gestures and brief words instead of lengthy explanations. When Zelia needed someone to tie off the rope, Morgan was already there. When Kisk's lines tangled, Zelia's long arms reached up and sorted it out without being asked. By noon, their defenses were complete. Jor circled the clearing, testing their work. He pulled on the food cache rope. It held. He reached out and tripped the perimeter alarm. The cans clattered enough to be heard inside the cabin. He examined Morgan's foraged food, identifying each item with obvious expertise. A low chord hummed from his spiracles. Adequate. Coming from Jor, it was the highest praise. The storm rolled in with the sunset, just as Morgan had predicted. Clouds piled up against the mountain peaks, dark and heavy with moisture. The wind picked up, sending the treetops into a wild dance. The air pressure dropped so fast it made Kisk's ears pop. They sat inside the cabin, a fire crackling in the wood stove, and waited. The rain started as a whisper and built to a roar, hammering the metal roof in waves. Lightning flickered through the windows, turning the world silver white for frozen instants. Thunder followed, the deep bass rumble rolling through the valley. Zelia's petals were fully open, her stamens sampling the air. The taste of lightning in the air, the atmospheric electricity, the rapid pressure changes. She spoke slowly, each word considered. This is what you smelled yesterday. The storm. Yeah. Morgan stood at the window, watching the trees bend and sway. You learn to read the signs. Heavy air, wind from the west, clouds building all afternoon. It's just paying attention. Paying attention, Zelia repeated. Not analysis. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes they're not. Kisk pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging the pain. On my world, storms happen in the upper atmosphere. We shelter in the deep forest where the branches are thick. We don't... She paused, searching for words. We don't watch them. We hide from them. I can understand that, Morgan said softly. They're terrifying, sure. Dangerous, no question. But beautiful all the same. The storm raged for 2 hours, the wind reaching velocities that made the cabin creak. A branch came down somewhere in the clearing with a crash that made them all jump. The power flickered. They disconnected the solar system as a precaution, and they sat in the firelight and shadow. And then, in a brief lull when the rain softened to a steady patter, they heard it. The heavy footfalls, the wet snuffling. The bear had returned. Morgan grabbed the poker and 2 cooking pots. She handed the pots to Kisk. When I say go, make noise, loud as you can. What are you gonna do? Same thing my dad taught me when I was 8. She moved to the door, one hand on the latch. Be bigger, louder, and more annoying than the bear. The bear was massive in the clearing, a dark shape against the wet earth. It moved toward where the food cache had been yesterday, following memory and instinct. Morgan threw the door open and ran onto the porch, raising the poker above her head. Rah! She yelled, a wordless primal sound that cut through the rain. Kisk banged the pots together, a metallic cacophony that echoed off the cabin walls. The bear froze, its head swiveled toward them, ears forward, trying to process this strange, loud primate and its even louder companion. Morgan banged the poker against the porch railing, adding another layer to the din. "Get out! Go! Get!" The bear took a step back, huffed, stood its ground for 3 long seconds. Then it turned and lumbered away, crashing through the underbrush without looking back. They stood on the porch, rain soaking them both, and watched it go. Kisk's quills vibrated with adrenaline, her chest heaving. Morgan lowered the poker, her grin splitting her face. "That," she said, "is how you deal with a curious black bear." The rest of the night passed quietly. The storm faded to a gentle patter, then stopped altogether. They dried off by the fire, changed into spare clothes, and settled in to wait out the darkness. Zelia broke the silence. "I would have frozen. When you opened that door and ran out there, I would have calculated the bear's mass, its potential aggression level, the optimal retreat path. I would have analyzed until the moment passed." "But you didn't," Morgan said. "You trusted me to handle it." "I trusted your experience." Zelia's flower head tilted. "That is separate from my own capability." "Is it? You hauled that food cache up 20 feet like it weighed nothing. Kisk rigged an alarm system that would have woken the dead. I knew how to scare a bear." Morgan poked at the fire, sending up sparks. "We each did what we're good at. That's how teams work." Kisk clicked her beak, tilting her head. "On my world, we have a saying. The spore pod that floats the highest is the first to freeze. It means trying to be the strongest, the fastest, the best at everything makes you vulnerable. I never understood it until now." "Because you're not trying to float the highest anymore?" "Because I don't have to. Zelia reaches it for me." She looked at the Signian. "And I watch for things she can't see. And Morgan knows things neither of us would ever learn from a simulation." Zelia's flower head opened fully, releasing the sweet scent of honeysuckle. "We are complementary, not redundant." "Exactly." Morgan smiled and pulled out the last 3 marshmallows from a bag she'd stashed in the cabin. "We're a crew." They roasted the marshmallows in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, the forest dripped with rain, and somewhere in the darkness, the bear was finding better places to forage. Jor emerged from his corner, the powder on his skin forming a lattice of hexagons that pulsed in steady waves. "Tomorrow morning," he gurgled, "we return to Venture Zenith. Mission complete." None of them spoke. The fire crackled and popped. The cabin held them in its simple warmth. After everything, the failures, the fear, the overwhelming chaos of Earth, the simple warmth of the fire felt earned, felt right. The shuttle lifted off at dawn, its engines drowning out the morning birdsong. Morgan watched the cabin shrink below them, the clearing becoming a patch of green and an endless sea of forest. Smoke still rose from the wood stove. She'd banked it properly before leaving, making sure no sparks would escape to threaten the surrounding trees. Kisk pressed her face against the viewport, her quills lying flat against her back. Her large eyes tracked the landscape as they climbed. The mountains, the valleys, the scale of a planet that terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. She'd walked on it, survived it, adapted to it. Zelia sat near the center of the cabin, as far away from the viewport as possible. But her flower head was fully open, and she was sketching on a datapad, the intricate pattern of a fern leaf, every vein and serration rendered so clearly she could have identified it from a botanical text, not from a database, from memory. Morgan dozed with her head on Zelia's sturdy shoulder, her body finally catching up with 3 days of constant vigilance. In sleep, she looked younger than her 18 years, the hard-won competence of her waking hours softening into simple exhaustion. Jor observed them from the pilot seat, his 4 limbs working the controls, the larger pair managing the yoke while he worked the consoles with his finger manipulators. His prosthetic rested on a secondary panel, chrome fingers dancing across holographic displays. The fine powder on his face-like mantle coalesced slowly, drawing together until it formed two upward curving crescents above his spiracles. The effect was unmistakable. Alien, strange, but utterly clear. He was smiling. "Control," he gurgled into the comm, his voice carrying the bubbling undertones that the translator couldn't quite capture. "This is Pathfinder Training Shuttle 4-1, requesting clearance to approach to Venture Zenith." The response crackled back immediately. "Shuttle 4-1, you're cleared for Bay 3. Welcome back. How'd the field test go?" Jor looked back at his sleeping crew. Human, Signian, and Aaron, curled together like the found family they'd become. A deep, satisfied chord hummed from his spiracles. "Control," he said. "Mark it in the record. The Earth Crucible has been conquered." There was a long pause. Then, "Say again, 4-1? "You heard me correctly. No casualties. Complete mission success." His smile grew wider, the crescents of powder deepening. "Prepare a full debrief team. The board will want to hear about this." The shuttle punched through the last of the atmosphere, leaving the blue curve of Earth behind. But none of them would forget it. The smell of pine and rain, the sound of thunder rolling through valleys, the feel of mud between their fingers, and fire's warmth on their faces. They'd learned what no simulation could teach them: to experience chaos, to respect it, and to live within it, rather than trying to calculate and control it. That strength came in many forms: raw power, sharp senses, hard-won wisdom. That a team was more than the sum of its parts. And sometimes, the best way to pass an impossible test was to change the question. Morgan stirred as they docked, her eyelids fluttering open. She looked around the shuttle, taking in her friends, both exhausted, both transformed, both looking back at her with something like reverence. "So," Kisk chirped softly, her voice quiet. "Was that what Earth is really like?" Morgan gave a smile that mirrored the one she'd worn when she first stepped off the shuttle into Earth's heavy air. "Nah," she said. "That was just the introduction."